Hans to come speak for us. As you may have noticed, as you watch our site, our originally scheduled speaker had some family business come up and couldn't make it. Hans has spoken before for AtlantaSPIN. He's very active with the IIBA, that's the business analyst equivalent of the PMI. He's a vice president for the enterprise delivery systems at SunTrust and has a lot of experience dealing with not only with process improvement, but also undoing process improvement that was done too complexly. So he's one of the good guys helping fight the battle to make things, process improvement, actually make things easier. So Hans, appreciate you being here tonight.
Thanks, Bill.
Again, thanks everyone. I appreciate you letting me be your backup speaker tonight, and sorry that the original speaker couldn't be here. But let's go ahead and get started. So first off, this session's for you, so I really want you to participate. I want you to get into it. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, if you need clarification, interrupt me, stop me, and we'll go from there. If there's any discussion topics that we want to get into, let's try and save those to the end to make sure that we've got time and I can get through the material. The second is the standard disclaimer, and at the end you'll see the standard SunTrust about the company slide. This presentation will be available to you on the AtlantaSPIN website. Also, all of my presentations I post to my personal website, which is hansekman.com. There's a link at the bottom, and you'll be able to download a PDF version there as well. So the second disclaimer is, what I say tonight is my opinion. Please don't hold it against SunTrust. They're nice enough to let me share some internal information with you. So if I say something that bothers you, it was me, not them. Also, no animals were harmed during the making of this presentation. So to get started, what I thought might help is to kind of set the stage and give you an idea of what our organization looks like, because every organization is structured a little differently, and kind of give you a context for it. So SunTrust is largely divided into different lines of business, representing different areas. As banking changes, as we try and serve our customers differently, these lines of business can also be reorganized and regrouped so that we're in a better position to deliver our products and services. To try and help in this, we have a dedicated delivery organization that supports the entire bank. And we've aligned that our lines of business have a delivery work stream for each one. So each line of business has a dedicated work stream, and the work streams deliver our IT projects. Crossing that entire spectrum is our enterprise testing organization. We do have a wonderful, dedicated group who's responsible for all testing activities, performance load testing. We also do static testing on requirements, so we've really taken full life cycle testing and applied it to our delivery. We also have a dedicated enterprise infrastructure group. This is the group that's responsible for all the hardware, the networking, the server setup and installations, any of our internet connectivity, all of our batch jobs, all of our backups, disaster recovery. As you can imagine, for some reason people are a little bit finicky about their money, so they want it available when they want to get to it. So our systems just can't go down. We're actually prepared that if we lose an entire city, you won't notice a difference. Your ATM will just keep working. We hope that never happens, but we're ready in case it does. Also, we have a number of other groups that are key stakeholders that kind of run the gamut as well, such as our security team, making sure that all of your information is kept secure at all times. Our compliance team, as you can imagine, there's 1 or 2 regulations that affect the banking industry, so we have to make sure we're always compliant with those as well. I'm going to back out of this a second, I'm sorry. We got the other presentation, sorry.
Okay, just unplug the remote.
Sorry about that, guys. I didn't notice until we got to the...
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
No problem. Sorry, I did not say. There we go.
But it's all true.
Everything's the same. Ah, with fancy animation. Okay.
Much better, Hans.
So, But the only difference, I restructured this. I gave this talk last week for an information management forum on innovations in corporation, and I wanted to restructure this slightly to focus on the process improvement aspect. So, and I also whittled it down so that we could talk more. When we look at our lines of business and the people that operate at that level, we're looking at our business leads, our business subject matter experts, all of our banking operations folks, and then our relationship managers, which is almost like an internal client manager, and our business analysts really work at the business level, understanding that context. For the project, when you get into the work stream projects, you have your typical project team, your BAs, your PMs, your developers. We do have a dedicated architecture team, which is responsible for our architecture, design, and strategy, and our QA resources, which is also ETO. So our architecture, enterprise architecture has the engineers and then the same stakeholders. So some of the challenges we were facing that kind of led to the group that was created was most of our solutions were dedicated to a single line of business or work stream because they were only implemented through projects. So each line of business would sponsor a project, they would end up putting in a system, buy software, but it only applied to them and no one else might know of it. So we really weren't replicating any of these solutions. Which meant we weren't using our enterprise solutions, or existing solutions as much as we could, and also we really weren't focusing on any emerging technologies. We were really looking at upgrading what we had, working with what we had, occasionally buying something new, but there never really was a focus on what we should be doing, because the core of a bank tends to be banking operations. It isn't IT, unless you are something like a net bank that is exclusively trying to offer services online. Also, any of the business groups that did not have a dedicated work stream assigned to them might not have any place to turn to. They would not know who to go to, getting services for them, getting resources. They didn't have project teams already staffed and ready to go. So from that, a solution was to create an innovations team. And this is out of our enterprise architecture team. So we took some of the brightest, smartest people who do not play well with others and put them in their own crew. So this way they could work on those emerging technologies. They could review the software that we bought and licensed and may not have ever used and try and see, are there areas in the business that this could solve? Because being a separate group looking from the outside really gave them a great opportunity to pick up on patterns, pick up on opportunities that were missed. One of the chaotic problems, though, that I helped the team solve was there really was a lot of structure. I mean, imagine your brightest geeks in one room, solving the problems that came to mind or that they were asked to solve. There wasn't structure, there wasn't the organization, there wasn't really the management focus because they didn't like that. So part of it was we really wanted to put a framework in place that could make us more productive and help us deliver more quantifiable value to the organization. So where do these requests come from? A lot of them come from our own ideas. Literally, as we're hanging out, we will come up with ideas and say, okay, what would the branch of the future look like? What would be the qualities of that? Is there anything there that we might be able to help influence? Others may come for enterprise architecture. As our architects are aligned to the different work streams, they may start to notice problems. They bring them to us and say, hey, we've got this. Have you seen any solution or do you know something that'll work? Also, other IT groups may come to us and say, you know, we're trying to put together a knowledge base. What tools do we have available? Well, we have 6 different products that could be used as a knowledge base. What exactly do you mean? And we'll help them get started. Also, we do a lot of assessments, a lot of internal reviews. So things might come out of an audit. We do voice of teammate surveys to really, we constantly query our employees to see how are things working in their job, where are opportunities, and then we can try and focus solutions in on that. And also just in reporting, we're going to find trends, patterns, problems that are going to pop up. Our senior leadership team is always full of great inspirational ideas of, hey, go fix that, you have 30 days. So that's been one of the kind of troubleshooting roles this team was playing. Also, our business groups will come to us because maybe they've got an old tool, they've got an Access database, and they don't know what to do now that they've really outgrown it. So that's kind of where some of those ideas are coming from. So what we wanted to do first was, when you're faced with a big problem and you don't know where to start, one of the first things I like to do is to start trying to categorize it or group it. Start seeing, like picture pages, which of these things is like the other, which one isn't, and see what you can come up with. And what we learned was, we really had 3 types of engagements that we were really good at. And that's where we want to focus at. You can get much more value by focusing in on your bright spots, the things you do well, than to try and fix everything that's wrong. That's why the first few years of marriage are so difficult. You're focusing on everything that your partner, husband can't do well, and not focusing on the fact that, hey, he did close the garage door tonight. Not speaking from personal experience, of course. So one of our first ways was evaluations. So doing simple needs assessments, doing a standards audit, looking at groups and seeing were they compliant with the standards that we had in place today, regardless of whether those standards should exist. And then also validation of other findings. We have cases where people will come to us and they say, well, this group came in and they told us that this is what we need to do and this is why. We can come in with our internal hat and say, is that fair? Is that right? Because one of the problems, an advantage of a consultant when they come into your group is they have no preconceived notions. The problem is they have no preconceived notions. So things that they say would solve something may not work within the constraints your organization has. The next type was consultation, and we spend a great amount of time here. So one would be helping people understand the technology and the standards that are available. Another is on process improvement. How can they do something better? And often what we're doing is simply mentoring and guidance. People don't know where to turn. We're getting them far enough down the road that that opportunity could be handed off to the appropriate team. The last, ironically, ends up being what the group was doing almost 100% of their time, or 90% of their time, which is doing prototypes and proof of concepts, developing reusable components and platforms, and I've got a few examples we'll get into at the end, and also sponsoring new applications, setting up a new application, getting it up and running, proving that it'll work, and then handing it over to another group to maintain and grow. So we also needed to say, we can't just do everything. We have limited resources, we have limited time, none of us wants to live in the office. So we had to put constraints and give us a way of prioritizing what we should do. So for every dollar we spend, we need to know, how much are we going to make on that dollar? Is it worth our time? We don't literally track dollar for dollar, but hypothetically we do. So we came up with, taking a look at the types of engagements, we really ended up coming up again with 3 things. You'll see 3 a lot. People can remember 3. 4, too confusing. 5, no hope. So anytime you can reduce things into 3 core actions, 3 core steps, 3 core outcomes, you will be vastly more successful. So the first one was defined as a quick win. We believed we could complete the engagement in about 30 to 60 days, and we'll take a look at what types of engagements we might do here. The other was, if we're doing a proof of concept or a prototype, it's really going to take us 60 or 90 days to know that we've got something there, for the most part. When we did an iPhone app proof of concept, it was 2 weeks. So there are exceptions, but that's usually a good one. If we're starting up a new application, we really think that it's going to take 180 days. Well, that's leaving a lot of the calendar year off at the moment. Well, part of that is, if anything takes longer than 180 days, shouldn't it be funded as a project? If it is going to take that long, if it is that important, it either needs to be funded or it needs to be decomposed into smaller units that fit into this team. The next was, how do you prioritize it? So we had to come up with criteria so that when somebody asked us to do something, we would know what to put in front of what others, other than just, hey, I like this is a little cooler. So one was, we've got very clearly defined corporate strategic goals, and that's one that we have to align with first and foremost. Our delivery organization has strategic goals, things that we're going after. So we wanted to make sure we were aligned with those goals. Within that group, our architecture team has goals of what we think our landscape, what we think our organization should look like. So we wanted to make sure that anything we do contributes to that vision, gets us further down the path. And the last is, that we were looking for things that had a high return on investment or lowered our total cost of ownership. Anybody can spend $1 million on a piece of software and it works great, it's got flashing lights and bells and whistles, but unless it's delivering more than $1 million of value somewhere in the next year, it's probably not worth doing. The last was often one of the most important things. How well does it fit the team? So first, do we have the skills that match this? We might need to bring on new skills if we decide to get in a new area, which is happening. But for the most part, we only have the people that we have. So if they can't do it, we shouldn't be doing it and we need to refer them somewhere else. The other is resource availability. If we've got to make sure we've got the time to do it, and that ends up being a pretty serious constraint. If you say I can allocate 4 hours a week, how many times can you do that before you're completely tapped out and not productive? The other was we wanted to try and really focus on things that leveraged our ongoing work. If it is so much easier for us to take a solution and customize it, replicate it, modify it, than it is to start over from scratch every time. And if we really are going to be in the business of delivering high return on value, low TCO, then we really needed to replicate solutions as much as we could and really get known as the group to go to for this, the group to go to for this, and not the things we aren't as good at. Often, as important as saying what you do, is saying what you don't do or what you're not. Because people understand not often better than they do. So we needed to set down some ground rules. First, we're not staff augmentation. We're not warm bodies you can throw at your project because you need somebody, you need them fast, and they've already got a badge and clearance. Also, we don't do projects that aren't funded. So just because you couldn't get your funding approved, it didn't fit into your pipeline, doesn't mean we're going to do it for free. That's like saying, well, okay, you know, I didn't qualify for the car loan, so can I drive it home anyway? The other, we're not production support. We have a dedicated production support team. So when your application breaks, we're not the people to call to try and fix it. That's not what we do. We do have to do production support when we're developing a new application or so while we're developing it, we're building it, we're doing the proof of concept, we're everything. We're the designers, we're the support, we work with our infrastructure team to implement, but we're on the hook during that period only. Also, we don't approve new software technologies. We're not the ones who are going to say, hey, you want to install this on your desktop, we'll decide whether it's good or not. We actually have a dedicated team that's what they do. They evaluate the security risks, they evaluate the maintenance costs, the licensing costs, and the business impact, and compare that to the list of the other 5,000 pieces of software we have licensed, and see, do we really need, you know, another version of Word on your desktop? So again, that's more that because you get innovations, people confuse that and they start asking for, well, I want video software. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I have a question about the production support. I
Yeah.
understand the group is not directly responsible for the production support, but again, there might be something which is real difficult for the project to solve. Then this team, which has really good knowledge in terms of technical and other aspects,
Right.
must be able to support them to fix those kind of issues.
No. I mean, that would make a good case, but
Say yes once and you'll never get out of it.
that's part of it. Part of it is if a project team is having trouble, we typically have an agreement with the vendor or some sort of a support agreement, and those would be the real experts in that area. Or we would pull in our production support team. So really our danger was less supporting projects or applications that are in production, and more of a danger becoming production support for the applications that don't have that expertise. Because in a lot of cases, we don't have it either. Our group has a core set, and we're focused in on those solutions. Now, the two areas where we're doing a tremendous amount of work because of the low cost of replication is SharePoint and Salesforce.com. And in that cases, yeah, our people are getting called as the experts and try and help. So our model there that we're evaluating is, could we build a production support team within our group temporarily and then move them over underneath production support when the financing is there? The problem is, if they don't have the dollars, we don't have the dollars either. So it's still warm bodies either way. But we have developed production support models, set it up to be able to, and then transition it, but only for solutions that we're working in.
So does the architecture comes from your group and then it gets rolled out to the actual project?
Well, we have most of our enterprise architects, there's over 80 of them, are aligned to the work streams. So that we already have those architects that are experts in the technologies for that work stream, and those are the people who would be helping troubleshoot.
So now, let's say the project comes to a situation where they are deploying it now, they are seeing there's a serious issue with the architecture which came from your group, and they might say, we don't know what to do, and the architecture came from you, so you should be able to support it.
Right, if it came from an application, a first generation application that we stand up,
Right.
or something that we did as a proof of concept, absolutely, we're on the hook for that.
All
Typically on our projects, we have what's called a warranty period, which means the project has to fix all defects within the first 60 days.
Okay.
And that 60 days, production support and the project team are working hand in hand. Most of the resources have already been reassigned to other projects, but the people who built it are there to support it. So for anything we develop, it's the same way. So when I say production support, we have a number of applications in-house that don't have dedicated production support resources. SharePoint is one of them. So if somebody's SharePoint site crashes, who fixes it? If it crashes on the server or hardware side, that's easy. We've got a team for that. If you don't know, if you're having trouble and your list isn't working, you're kind of on your own. But we've established a model to create that group. We just haven't gotten the bodies hired yet. The other is the Chicken Little group. Sky is falling. Something critical has happened. We have an emergency federal regulation we need to get in the next 30 days. We're not that team either. Now, it's not that we couldn't be, but we're being very careful that we're not that team, because the people we have, because they're very creative, because they're very motivated, they're very innovative, these are not the people you want to tie down with maintenance issues. They will leave. They will walk out. I was only half joking that, some of the people are a little persnickety. They don't play well with others. That's why they're in this team. But if you need somebody that can knock out some phenomenal code and some great ideas in a short amount of time, these are the people you go to. So part of it is knowing your team and finding the best people. In our team, almost everyone is a very technical architect. We have one BA, which is me, and I'm there because I also have a wider skill set and can work in a lot of different areas, especially process automation. We have one project manager who helps with all the administrivia and helps keep things going and figures out when we need more hard drive space, what are all the flaming hoops we have to jump through before we can actually get it. So that's really helped a lot, but other than that, it's all tech geeks. So let's take a look a little closer at how this breaks down in a life cycle. So with any project, you're going to have a series of iterations, a series of reviews before you have an output. So at the beginning, we have some sort of a need that we're trying to solve. Once we get into the first round of iterations, there may be an outcome in that 30 to 60 days. So typically in that first 30 to 60 days, we should be able to complete an assessment, some sort of a proof of concept, or some sort of a prototype. And at that point, if that's the end, we would end up transitioning it we would deliver it and transition it to whoever the sponsor is. The key in this, the recurring theme that was missing in the past was, everything we build needs to go to somebody else. We're not building things for ourselves, we're building things to meet business needs. We're replicating solutions for the business, so that business needs to own these. Well, if I'm not done there, the other option is, that project may be slated for a 60 to 90 day, or maybe extended into a 60 or 90 day. At that point, we should be able to create a beta application, some sort of a component, or a new platform. We may be able to stand up a platform that people can use. The last longer term solution would be in the 90 to 180 day range, And that's where we might have the first release of a production application. So we've built something, we've stood it up, almost as a phase 1 production-ready release, but somebody else is going to then own and take that application on down the road. And again, anything that extends past that, our goal is that needs to be stood up as a project. Now, our resources could be assigned to that project and work as a traditional project. That could happen, but that's not our primary goal. So, how do you manage all this? How do you keep this all straight? Well, we eat our own dog food, first off. We do a lot of work with SharePoint, so we use SharePoint as the tool. We have a client-facing SharePoint site with an overview video, which also demonstrates what we can do with tools we have in-house, and a form that people complete to say what their need is, why are they looking to us for help, which strategic goals does it align to, and what value, how can you prove that you're meeting these strategic goals. That then goes through a review process before it gets actually activated. Then, once we activate it, we actually create a mini engagement site, another SharePoint site for each of these projects or each of these initiatives. So we have a collaborative site leveraging SharePoint for all of our documents, our calendaring, our communications, issues tracking, defect tracking, really anything we need. Surveys, SharePoint, we're only on 2007, but it's actually pretty robust. You can do a lot of your demand management through it. Well, this model works so well, we're now replicating this as our demand management tool for many other areas of the business. Once we activate a project, we insist that there be an engagement lead. Somebody in our organization needs to take responsibility for the engagement. They will organize the team, they're responsible for the deliverables, they're responsible for status reporting. All of us may participate on the same projects, but each one has a single point of contact that the business or our sponsor can go to, or our manager for that sake. And then, again, as I said, our project manager isn't here as much to be an engagement lead as he is to help us through all the hurdles that go on and being able to deliver these solutions, working around the issues, helping us with licensing, helping us find the right resources that we need when we need help, and also completing all of the background stuff that has to happen, like the management reporting that we're responsible for, demonstrating value, showing how our time allocation breaks out. In a lot of cases, like with the SharePoint support, we're now individually tracking if somebody calls us for SharePoint support, is it because they don't know SharePoint or because they don't know the tool we built that stands on SharePoint, which are two very different things. And what we're finding is, excuse me, about 80% of the help issues we deal with is just common SharePoint. And that can be a little difficult. So what are some of the success stories? Where has this really paid off for us? Well, in the consultation area, one of the first things we did is our senior leadership team wanted a way of improving employee recognition. And what we did was we set up a SharePoint site for them with workflows, with recognitions, with rankings, with votings, with a lot of enhanced communications tools so that they could stay better in touch. So it combined the recognition they were looking for with blogging, with questions and answers, with a knowledge-based type component for that particular leadership team. We had one of our things that came out of our Voice of Teammates surveys said that it is almost impossible to complete a service request, to get IT work done when you need it. So one of our senior chief architect gave it to our team and says, go for it, you've got 60 days to figure this out. And my first question was, okay, which system are you talking about? And they're like, well, our service request system. We have 6. There's your problem right off the bat. So we can look at them all. So we spent about 60 days doing focus groups, helix sessions, surveys, interviews, reverse engineering our tools to figure out what is it people are trying to do, why can't they do it, and are these issues already on the roadmap for these different support tools and we just haven't built them yet, because sometimes it just takes time. Also, yes sir?
What was the thing you said, helix or something?
Helix. Helix is a requirements gathering, brainstorming technique that is based around the blatant abuse of Post-it notes. So what you do is you have a topic or an issue or something. Everybody has a stack of Post-it notes and a big marker, and they write everything they can think of related to that. And you paste it all over a wall. Then you start grouping it and regrouping and combining items, redefining them until you know. And what ends up happening is you end up taking what looks like a complex, random series of brainstorming into a number of distinct categories. You then start going through usually a voting process where people vote on what do they think is the most important. And you keep going through that until you find, using my mentor's favorite rule of three, the three things you need to focus your effort on. And it's a great way of whittling down, and it's fairly easy technique to learn. So in the service request system, because there were so many different issues, it was the fastest way to get our core group of users to know that we were listening to them first and foremost, and to get all the ideas of what they thought wasn't working, and then group them. And guess what? We found things that had nothing to do with service requests. I mean, we found HR issues, and we just had to pass them along. We couldn't solve them with technology. Our infrastructure team was getting a little frustrated that when they tried to build out a server solution, backup strategies, they didn't have the data they needed. So we worked with them and the architecture team on the software side to come up with a standard set of project-based non-functional requirements. So we actually created a template of fill-in-the-blank non-functionals that a business would be able to fill out, business and technical team could fill out with the BA's help. They could fill in the blanks, and it would end up translating to the software design and infrastructure design questions that needed to be. Like one of the things is system availability, core operating hours. You tell that to to a business person, and they either glaze over or they say it needs to be 24/7. It always needs to be up. It can't go down even for a minute. Okay, quadruple your price tag. On that, we changed it to, okay, what hours of the day are weekdays are most people going to use the system? What about in the evenings? What about on weekends? What about holidays? When does the system do some sort of a batch processing? What about monthly? What about weekly? What about daily? And by answering those questions, we found that people could answer in real English, and it could be extracted into our disaster recovery, our automation, our backup strategies fairly easily. Again, we focused in on the 80% that could be automated or replicated, and then some projects are unique. So you've got to assume 20% of it, the project team's going to have to come up on your own. We actually wrote a guidance document with questions. So if we had a perfectly green, off-the-street person, they could read a question, and it would map to which blanks they needed to fill out. Now, hopefully, most people didn't need that, but you never know. In the evaluation area, I mentioned, we were wondering, okay, everyone's doing stuff on iPhone. What would it take to develop an app? So two of our really good programmers downloaded the development kit onto their MacBooks, and in 2 weeks they had a fully functional branch locator that was more feature-rich, more accurate, and more useful than a demo provided by a vendor. And we used that as basically a proof that, okay, what else could we do? So we came up with a long laundry list of internal applications. If we were allowed to use iPhones or iPads, what could we do and how much effort would it take to develop? So the minute those devices get approved for our use, we can start rolling out some of these solutions. To expand our SharePoint capabilities, we also looked at third-party plugins. SharePoint's workflow is abysmal. I mean, there is none. So we actually bought and installed a product from Nintex that is a workflow engine. It's like a flow charting tool where you literally drag and drop your flow, add your parameters, and it builds out custom workflows that are compatible with SharePoint. We also took an in-depth look at Microsoft Record Center. We needed a way of archiving a lot of data, archiving information across the organization, but also specifically for SharePoint. If we're using all this information in SharePoint, how are we going to archive it? How do we know that it's compliant with our enterprise records retention information? Because a lot of people know that with anything, you need to keep certain files for a certain amount of time. Almost more important, you need to get rid of them as of that date, because if you have everything all the way in the past and the lawyers come and you now have to go back 100 years of files and deliver all of those, you might as well just pay off the lawsuit. You just can't gather that much data. So we met with lots of different teams that had that need and talked about this as a potential solution that they could engage. And that's still being evaluated. But we've got the hooks that'll work with that or other solutions. When you actually get into the core, what's some of the cool stuff we built? This group was responsible for setting up our first SOA, our service-oriented architecture and web services. They built it out as a proof of concept showing how instead of having each different application across the business tie into the mainframe, tie into reporting, tie into different systems, we could use a service-oriented architecture, tie into the same hooks, and dramatically reduce our total cost of ownership. So they stood that up, wanted as a proof of concept, and actually we formed an entire new work stream dedicated to building out reusable components like that. SharePoint. Our projects in the past were not consistently managed. Teams could use a generic SharePoint site, some used a shared drive, others used other tools. We actually custom built a SharePoint template that fit perfectly in with our methodology. So when you kick off a project, all you have to do is fill out a form with some basic information like what people do you know of, what roles will they be in, what's your project code, and we actually pre-populate your dashboard that ties into our other reporting systems. We pull in templates from our enterprise framework, so we go ahead and preload all the templates you're going to need. We use metadata so that we're able to use different SharePoint views instead of folders, dramatically reducing the time to find and update files. So that's rolled out, and our engagement site is actually a watered-down version of that template. So we found a way of taking that metadata functionality and repurposing it for a much wider audience, much better use. We also automated all of our document approvals using the Nintex workflow. So instead of collecting emails or physical signatures, I can actually grab a file version, send it out to a group of people, and it tracks their approvals with that version. So now all of our compliance checks are automated too. All I have to do is build a view of a page of required documents, and I can see that everything was approved by at least one person for each required role, dramatically reducing the amount of man hours it takes. We're doing a tremendous amount now with Salesforce.com. There's a lot of powerful tools. It's a hosted application, so we don't have to worry about upgrades or maintenance or the network infrastructure. But with anything that's too easy, it means it's really easy to abuse. So we've put a team in place to really help the business figure out what should you set up, how should you set it up, what's the safe way of doing it, when should you use different functionality, and then also every time they upgrade and add new widgets, what do the widgets do? How can we use them? Should we use them? So a couple conclusions and then we'll get into a little discussion. A dedicated team like this is a viable option for maximizing your current investments. Really finding a team that is good at looking at solutions, looking at what you have, and trying to find other places where it matches. It's not quite saying, you know, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Instead, it's saying, I have a hammer, how many nails can I find in the organization that I can go beat up on? The other is, you've really got to control the terms of your engagement. If you don't constrain what it is you're going to do, how it is you're going to work, what are the parameters, where are you going to focus your team, your success ratio, the value you're delivering, is going to be much less. Again, hammer and nail. Yeah, I can pound a screw in, but is that really the best way of doing it? And the last is, your engagements, no matter how much you want to help somebody, no matter how much value solving their problem would be, if you don't have the skill set or the temperament to solve that problem, you need to let it go. And that can be really difficult. And I have trouble because a lot of my experience has been in the consulting, and any one time someone has a problem, I don't know the answer, I want to go find it. Well, we've really got to focus in on the areas. We don't lack for demand. If we ever get bored, then I'll start looking for more nails and screws that I can go solve. But right now, you really want to focus in your engagements on the areas that fit your team's capabilities the best. So now we'll get into questions. In the presentation that that you'll be able to download. There is a slide about SunTrust, and read it. Please read it. It's quite enjoyable. Also, my contact information is there if you'd like to. I'm more than happy to connect on LinkedIn. If possible, just mention that it's through AtlantaSPIN so that I don't accidentally forget that we had met, or at least you've met me. Yes?
So did you ever manage to get rid of the 6 different ticketing systems? And did you come up with something that was easier to navigate than the original system they had?
Actually, yes. So what we were able to do is we ended up grouping the solutions or the focus into 3 core areas. We came up with a list of recommendations for each that was backed up by the data that we had provided. That was then given to the management team that then said, okay, these different groups, each one was responsible for an area. And actually, ironically, what happened is while we were doing the assessment and we started identifying the problems, the groups started recognizing how serious their problems are, and we started seeing solutions going in before our assessment was completed. One of the examples is we had a certain support team that did not do surveys. They did if you called in for help, there was no way you could say whether or not your problem had been solved. The only thing that was measured is how fast the ticket was closed. So by the time, before we even got this out, all of a sudden you were getting an email. Thank you. You contacted so-and-so about so-and-so problem on this date. How was your service? Was your problem solved? Are you happy? And we're like, all right, they cheated. They're breaking it out before the report comes in so they can say, yeah, we already took care of that. In a lot of areas, we had a number of different ticketing systems. We're consolidating on one. So part of it was just a bandwidth issue. A lot of the navigation problems we were having, they had wanted to solve, but just for the sake of time, they hadn't yet. But they ended up taking our navigation suggestions. So instead of building what they thought would work, they were building based on how we had already assessed people were going to use the system. And that helped out tremendously, because in that case, it was a very technical group. It wasn't an end-user focused group. And they said, we just don't have a UX person on this. We would love this information, we just didn't know. So I think so. Yes?
Can you describe maybe some of the challenges you face with government regulation? Because I work in the healthcare industry, so probably is almost as many banking rules there are healthcare rules as well, and it's something, if you could describe some of your challenges and everything.
Absolutely. So I think the best way I could say it is that they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The natural tendency that people have is if something is working, I need to constrain it, lock it down, control it to make it better. When often going the opposite direction, simplifying it, making it easier is a better way to go. So I'll give you an example. Dodd-Frank passed to say, okay, we had a banking collapse. We had some banks that weren't playing nice. We decided to not let them fail because they weren't playing nice and customers didn't want them, so we're going to keep them alive anyway. But we're going to make them play better. So we're going to set up 64 different regulatory groups that are now going to pass down restrictions that aren't going to be mediated by Congress. So if somebody says, I don't think anybody should use black ink, we will have to buy a lot more pens. It could be things like that. That's a little bit extreme. You may have heard, how many people have heard about the changes to your debit card that's coming potentially in July? And if you've heard on the radio, especially if you listen to WSB, that there's some ads saying, thank you to our senators for finally clamping down on these evil banks who are charging all these fees. Brought to you by the Merchants Association, because guess who was getting hit with those fees? So every time you swipe a credit card, you get hit with, typically the merchant gets hit with a 50-cent charge and anywhere between 1% and 4% of the total transaction. Well, every time you swipe a debit card, it costs the bank money to transfer that money around, to do all the accounting behind it, to pay for all the systems and the terminals and the networks that go into it. Because every time you swipe, we are paying fees to that terminal owner for the right of somebody to swipe it. So most banks, I think the average was around 50 or 60 cents was the swipe charge. but it wasn't a percentage, it was a fixed cost to the merchant. They've now passed a regulation that says those fees cannot exceed 12 cents. We can't afford it. No bank can. So almost every bank now is going to be charging their customers 50 cents to $1 every time they swipe their credit card. Or excuse me, swipe their debit card and don't use it as credit. Because the bank gets money if you use it as credit. They get that part of that percentage. They're going to limit and say you can't use it for more than $50 if the purchase is over $50. Other banks that are trying to be better are bundling it with their credit, with their banking services, or saying if you're using free checking, you're going to have to pay a monthly fee if you want to use your debit card. And so that's another, they tried to help the consumer, and it's going to end up hurting the consumer in the end. A lot of it is that people just don't understand the correlation, so they try and solve one problem, and they end up making things worse. We have dramatically cut down on the number of bad mortgages that are being written. The translation, if you don't put 22% down, you're not getting a mortgage. Just because the restrictions are that high. Yeah.
So do you have someone in your team keeping track of all these things when you're writing these applications to make sure that you're meeting, because what we've done is we have someone whose sole purpose now is just to keep track of everything. I mean, do you take a similar strategy, or how have you tried to improve that process so you don't get burned?
Absolutely. So we have a dedicated regulatory group who every time a note, memo, email, news article, they analyze it, determine the impact, and already have it charted out what might need to change. So that group was working. They are completely overwhelmed. So what we did was we looked at, and actually one of our engagements was working with them and suggesting several software tools where they could put the regulations in, have a traceability to all the systems or business units that it affected, so every time there was a modification, almost like a change request to a regulation, we would know where to do the impact analysis. So yeah, we have actually established a whole hierarchical system that is on par with our requirements management tool just for the regulations. Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the process you mentioned is the system development life cycle, or some professionals they call new product development life cycle. Only the question, is different name only, but it's the product sequence.
Absolutely. So our goal was, we are following the exact development life cycle. If you do prototyping, if you look at RUP, it looks the same. What the difference is, we added additional constraints, and that isn't the life cycle our projects use. Our projects are all waterfall, and we're doing iterative development. So that's one change. But no, you're absolutely right. We're following the industry standard. Yep.
Actually, 3 questions, if that is okay.
Sure.
The first is, how do I get funding for such team?
That's always a fun one. Part of it is, first, if you can find a group that has bandwidth or a fit, start to ship this work to them quietly, have them do it, and start showing what the success is. So this group literally started off because they needed a small team to just test some things and to develop some proof of concepts. Then the team grew, and then when the team got to a certain bandwidth and was being asked to do more and more, then they brought in the PM, the BA, and we set up the engagement model to formalize it. So all of this, it's a little viral. You start small, you find team members, even if they're working on other things, find people that have extra time or an interest, get them to solve the problem, get them together, and then you end up building the business case for it and find a sponsor who says, hey, how would you like to own this team?
Okay, so the funding comes actually from the core, not from the project for getting consulted.
Correct.
Okay.
We have no chargebacks to projects.
Okay, my second question is, how is this team measured? In terms of performance, or how much funding it should go for?
Great question again. Well, I'm always nervous when somebody sets criteria that they're going to judge me against, because I haven't been part of it. So we created our own. Part of this engagement model, I set up case studies. We set up what we were going to measure ourselves against based on what got into our queue. So at the end of each of these engagements, we already know where we were going to be successful, and then I pull the data to back up that we were. So from a project standpoint, that's the way it's done. From an employee standpoint and a contribution standpoint, it fits to our standard performance metrics. So each role has expectations based on the level of your position. Twice a year, there's surveys sent out that people rank you against those skills and provide comments. And then we have a professional development manager who consolidates that, evaluates you, and then scores you on a 5-point scale where no one gets a 5.
Okay. So everyone gets a 3. So everyone gets a 3. That's your favorite number.
A little bit. We try not to. 3 isn't good. You're expected to do, 3 is you met all expectations.
You said 3 was great.
Not on a scale. Likert scale is fine, but in terms of things you're working on.
Okay, my last question. Now, when your team does the initial assessment and does the proof of concept, and when it goes to the project, does that go as like a rule that this is your boundaries and you should stick into this, or this goes like a guideline? Okay, this is what we thought, and here is something to you, and it's up to you how you take care of it.
More of the latter. Okay. Whoever we hand it to would be because they've probably been part of the process, they have ideas of how they're going to expand it, but they're going to be responsible for taking it, and we may continue to advise them, but we've got to let it go. Okay. And that is hard sometimes. There are certain things that the team's built, turned over, and it was not built out in the future phases the way we wanted to. We may end up taking ownership of those back because what was built, what was promised, isn't what is being delivered, and the value isn't there. So we may end up having to restaff and get those projects back on track. Yes?
I liked your rules of engagement, and I liked it in respect, I think I like it in respect to, you know, basically the target-rich environment where you've got a whole lot more than you can do, and you're trying to put things in boxes and keep them there.
Yep.
Do you have any rules that you might not have talked about related to hot projects coming in and superseding, pushing out of the way, knocking down projects, scattering, killing, that kind of stuff? Do you have any way of preventing that from just becoming chaos?
So part of it was, actually that was the #1 reason that the project manager and I worked to put this in place, was because without a visibility as to what people were doing and what value and why they were doing it, everything that popped up seemed dramatically important. So part of that is by getting some buy-off by our manager and the criteria, every time he pops up a new thing, I can go back and say, okay, here's what we're working on. Is it more important than these? A perfect example, one of the tasks that I've been very delinquent on is I'm coming up with a new template to use to describe all of our team roles. So we're trying to standardize all our team roles so that we've got it consistent and it can be leveraged across the organization. That was a hot thing that's on my manager's plate of deliverables. And he asked about it yesterday, and I said, I haven't worked on it. I said, I've read all the background material, I have some ideas, haven't done it. Here's the other things I have been working on it. Is it more important? Is it critical? Because if it's critical, I'll shift, because I'm used to having to shift on a dime. And he's like, it's really important, but it's not critical. So yeah, we do that, and part of it is filtering. They'll still get through. And the other thing, well, yeah, things like that will get through, but if you have structure, if you do have the organization, it's easier to say no.
So your organizations are segmented closely enough that there is an authority there that can help do the pecking order.
In any area, we have a manager, and he ultimately determines what we do. Now, if people yell loud enough to his boss, we end up doing different things.
Sure.
Well, thanks so much. If anyone has any questions, I'll hang around a little while afterwards. And thanks again to Stephen and AtlantaSPIN for letting me speak.